Hi everyone, this is Sir Gantlot. Welcome back to my course in how to use Microsoft Project. This is lesson 6, and in this lesson we're going to focus on updating a project schedule to reflect real-world progress. And of course, the progress that's going on around us may not be what we expected. We may be ahead of schedule, we may be behind schedule, or we may be a mixture depending on which task it is we're talking about within our schedule. It is tasks that we're going to be focusing on, not just updating them, but also reflecting the implications of task status going forward in our project. If something is taking longer than expected, we need to let Microsoft Project know when we will be finished, but more significantly, we may need to revise some of our estimates for future tasks based on real-world experience of delivering within this particular project. We will also show how we can compare the progress that is happening and forecast progress against a baseline for the project. And we'll also look at some of the progress reports that are available in project to show us what's going on. More importantly, to show other stakeholders what's going on in the project that we're managing or tracking. If you do like the course, if you're finding any of the lessons helpful, well, please like them. As you always get asked by every YouTube presenter, consider subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications. But more importantly, if you do find it helpful, let other people who use Microsoft Project know that this course is out there. You might consider buying me a coffee. You probably are not in a position to do that physically, but you could do so virtually by going to buymeacoffee.com/SirGantlot. If you do that, I'm very grateful indeed. If you don't do that, that's perfectly fine. I'm just grateful that you're watching this presentation. To get the most from the course, this lesson and other lessons, what I suggest you do is try to follow along. Have another machine, another screen, which has your own version of Microsoft Project on there, and try to replicate what I'm doing. If I get ahead of you, if I'm going too fast, then of course you can pause, rewind, and review something that I'm showing you. All of that will be helped if you set the YouTube quality settings to the highest available to you. If you hold a PMI credential, such as a PMP, Project Management Professional, you can submit professional development units for taking part in these lessons. Use the category that you see down there. Okay, let's get rolling with Microsoft Project. So to start showing how we can track progress, we need to have something to track progress of. So let's create a new blank project. You can get to this screen by going to File and New, and you can then go to Blank Project. Click it once to say that's what you want to create, and then again, and it will go ahead and do it for you. Now, it may be that your system is configured to come straight into a blank project, which is fine. A couple of things we need to do before we get started. Firstly, at the bottom left of the screen, it says New Tasks Auto-Scheduled on my system. If yours says New Tasks Manually Scheduled, then just click and select Auto-Scheduled. A couple of other things you might want to do. I'm going to suppress this timeline view at the top simply because it takes up a little bit of the screen space. You can leave it there if you want to, but I'm going to suppress this, and I do that by going to View, and I'm going to uncheck Timeline. Just gives us a little bit more space on the screen here. So let's set a start date for a project. And the date that I'm going to set, let's go to Project Information up here, and let's set a start date. Let's go to the 1st of February 2022. And while you've got this screen open, make sure that the current date, it will probably say something other than the 6th of February 22, set it to February the 6th, 2022. Now, the date format in both these cases is US format. Yours may be showing another format. But you can select a date simply by dropping down. So it doesn't matter what format you're using, just choose the day there. So today, February 6th, and again, start date. Let's drop that down. February the 1st. And then I can click OK and OK again. And on my screen, you'll see that I've got a dotted line representing the start of the project and a green line representing the start of today's date as set in the tool. Well, let's put in a task. Let's put in here a task. Let's say collect requirements. As soon as I hit enter, assuming that you've got new tasks auto-scheduled, you'll see the task will set to 1 day question mark, a default just so that project can paint something on the screen, starting on the start day of the project. If yours did not do this and create a bar, it's because you still have your tasks, new tasks auto-scheduled. You can change the task you just created as well in the task mode column. You can drop down and make it auto-scheduled if you didn't set auto-scheduled when we started off. But for this task, let's make it 10 days in duration. And now we can hit enter. So compared to today's date, as we told project today is, this task was scheduled to start 4 working days ago. It's a 10-day task, so we've got another 5 working days in the week ahead of us, and the week after that, 1 working day. As you'll probably recall from earlier videos, if you set a time to, or a duration to a number of days, project interprets that as working days per the calendar which is applied to the project. I didn't change the calendar, so what we have here is the standard project calendar where Monday through Friday are working days, Saturdays and Sundays are not. One of my early videos does explain how to configure calendars and change working times. One other thing we're going to do here is we're going to set a baseline for this project. So let's go to Project, Set Baseline, Set Baseline again, and then just use all the defaults as they appear there and click OK. And then what I'm going to do is display over here the baseline. So if I go to Format, drop down Baseline, and here I'm not setting a baseline, I'm deciding to display a baseline. Now again, as explained in the previous video, what a baseline does is it just takes a snapshot of the dates of all of the tasks at the point that you took the baseline. So here we have a situation where everything is in sync. Our task was planned to start at the beginning of Tuesday in the previous week and finish at the end of Monday, the week after the upcoming week. And the baseline, the gray bar here, is showing those same dates. So let's now imagine that we are at this point in time and we want to update status as it was reported to us through the end of the previous week. Imagine that during the course of last week, you said to everybody, before you head off for the weekend, let me know status on tasks. Because after all, most projects don't have just one task, and we'll see that in a moment. But everybody responds to you, and now you had a quiet Saturday. And before the week kicks in, you spend a bit of time on Sunday updating status as it was at the end of last week. So let's also tell project that this date here, the end of last week, is the date that we're statusing to. So we can go back to our project tab here, project information, and let's set the status date. Let's drop that down and choose the Friday before the current date. And we'll click OK. And just to illustrate that we have set a status date, let's choose to display it on the Gantt chart here. Let's go to the Format tab. Let's go to Grid Lines over here. Let's click Grid Lines. And I'm going to drop down to where it says Status Date here. I'm going to choose what I want the vertical bar to look like for status. I'm going to choose this one here. And let's display it in red. And then when I've done that, I can click OK. Now, you do not have to display a status date when you're updating a schedule. I find it very helpful, but I'm displaying it here more for illustration of what's going on than anything else. But it is very helpful not just to set a status date. It's important to set a status date, but it can be displayed if you choose to. So let's think about what we would have liked to have heard from the person who is working this task. What we would have liked to have heard from them is that they are complete through to the status date. They've done 4 days of that task. They've still got 6 days of that task left to do. Now, the vast majority of folks, when they update progress, what they would do is just add in a percent complete. So let's right-click on the task mode and display the percent complete column. So I'm right-clicking, going to insert column, and the very first one, percent complete, is what I'm going to choose. So what I'm going to do with this is, well, here's the thing. That person could have told me that they're 5, maybe 10% complete. And you can just about see there's a little blue line, which is showing the percent complete. To make it a little bit more obvious, I'm going to choose not to display the baseline for a moment. So on the Format tab again, I'll drop down, and I'm going to not display the baseline. Now, I haven't unset the baseline. I'm just choosing not to show it. So as of right now, that person is reporting a situation where they've done some of the work, but not all of it. Actually, if you think about it, what they're telling you is they've done 10% of the work. Well, here's the thing. If they've done 10% of the work, 90% of that work still needs to be done. And if it took them a full 1 day to only get 10% of the work, if it took them to the end of this week to get 10% of the work done, when they should have been a lot further along, more than likely, they're going to take longer to do all the rest of the work. Not necessarily, but it is a possibility. So in many cases, simply saying 10% complete or 50% complete can give you less information than you really want from someone. Let's think of another situation. Of course, what they might tell you is that they are 90% complete. Well, really, if they're telling you they're 90% complete as of this point in time, they probably don't need all the rest of that time to get it done. They'll probably be done in the middle of next week sometime. So let's think about that a little bit further in a moment. In the meantime, let's set the progress back to 0. Now, while we're doing that, let's have a look at the Task tab up here. And you'll notice that there are some statusing quick links up here. So for example, if I've got a task selected and I want to show it as 0% complete, I just choose 0% complete. If I wanted to say that it's 75% complete, I could do that, and it immediately updates it over here. Now, of course, someone might say, I'm done, 100% complete. And if you think about it, you've now got a slightly distorted schedule because that bar doesn't need to be going all the way out there anymore. So again, what we really need to be telling Project is this task finished as of the status date. There is nothing else left to do. But I have to say that setting status through these, at least getting something in the form of status, is better than not getting anything at all. There are many people out there who will tell you, instructors, don't ever just set the percent complete. Well, I'm a little bit more pragmatic than that because I use this tool all the time. So what I would say is just be aware of the implications of what you're doing. For example, if you say this task is 50% complete, you're really telling Project you're ahead of schedule. You probably don't need to go all the way out there to get it done. So you may want to modify the duration. While we're looking at these up here, let's set it back to 0% complete. And let's look at this thing here, mark on track. And what that means is mark it as complete through to the status date. The progress is where it should be through to the status date. And Project calculates what the percent complete is for you accordingly. 40% complete if it's on track. But as always, the situation is not necessarily as straightforward as it might appear there. So let's set it back to 0 and think about what some of the alternatives might be. Because after all, when you ask the person responsible for this how things are going, they might say, I'm done. They might say, I started, but I didn't start until Thursday. Or they might tell you, I haven't started at all. Or they might say, I started on Wednesday, but don't worry too much, boss. I think I'll be finished by this coming Thursday. All of those are possibilities that you might hear from people. And so it tends to be better to tell project what the scenario is rather than feeding in a percent complete. And by the way, if I feed in 25% complete, project assumes it started as it was planned to do. Likewise, on a task, if you say it's 100% complete, project assumes it started and finished as planned. And again, that doesn't make any sense because that date is in the future. But if you are updating a task in the past that was scheduled to happen this week I'm showing you here, the previous week back here. And if I were to say that task is 100% complete, again, project will assume it started and finished as planned. But again, that may not be the case. It might have started a day or two early or late, likewise with the finish. So let's set this back to 0% complete. And let's think about updating where the scenario is a little bit more detailed, if you like, a little bit more nuanced than I'm on track. To do that, I'm going to choose a different set of columns altogether across here. In other words, I'm going to apply a different table to the view. Right now, we're looking at something called the entry table, a fixed set of columns. Now, I actually added in the percent complete column, but nevertheless, we started with the entry table. And we can tell that that's what we're looking at by just moving our cursor over to that little green area. It turns green when you hover over there. It says we're looking at the Gantt chart through the entry table. And we can change tables. We could just right click here and choose a different table. Or I could go to the View tab, and where it says Tables, I could drop down and choose a different table. I'm actually going to choose the Tracking table. And notice what that displays for me is a different set of columns, specifically columns that are to do with updating status. So I'm going to say, okay, what is the status on this task? And the person says, well, I actually started a couple of days later than planned. So let's tell project that this column here is actual start. Let's drop down and say that we actually started this a couple of days later. We started it on the 3rd. Immediately, project moves it to say that that's when it started. So it moved the taskbar. Now, the follow-up question would be, okay, so if you started then, are you still going to need the full duration of that task to get finished? Because if so, it's going to push it out into this following week here through to 2/16. And the person may say yes. Now, if the person says yes, then I would leave everything like it is with one exception. I would now say it is complete through to this point. It's on track. And a quick way to do that, go to Task here and say that it's on track. Here we go. And project then calculates for you is 20% complete. Now, another possibility, of course, is the person might say, well, actually, I don't need all that amount of time to get that done. So let's set it back to 0% complete. Let's set the actual start again to Thursday the 3rd. And then the person says, I don't really need the full 10 days, boss. That's why I started a bit later. I only need 7 days, in fact. So let's drop that down to 7 days. And then when you move on to the next task, the last thing to do is to say to project, okay, now mark it on track. And project calculates that is 29% complete for you. In a moment, we're going to go to a more complicated schedule. And we're going to be seeing how we track where there's maybe more than one resource working on a task, where we've got resources doing different amounts of work on a task. Let's go back while we're looking here to the regular entry table, the initial set of columns we started with. Let's right-click on this green area, and I'm just going to choose the entry table. Here's my original standard set of columns. Again, I had added in the percent complete column, so it shows it's 29% complete. Let's just show one other way that sometimes people like to update progress rather than calling up that tracking table. Another way you could do it is on the View tab, you could say Details here, which splits the view, and then right-click in this big gray area. Somebody told me the other day they refer to this as the dead air area. Fair enough. It's the big gray area. Let's right-click on there and choose the Work tab. Now, there are no resources assigned to this, so therefore we don't see any hours of work, even when I select the task here. But nevertheless, I can still update progress here. I could say what the actual start was. I could change the percent complete here if I wanted to. So sometimes people like to update through this view here. If there are resources in particular, they'll use this view, as we'll see in the next section. Or they might simply click the Schedule tab here, and then they can update things like the duration and again the percent complete, but without having to update work. But if you don't like splitting the view, then I would just apply the tracking table, or you could put in different columns that are from the tracking table. You could put in remaining duration, for example, and maybe just actual start. Let's think about going to a somewhat more complicated schedule where the scenario is not quite what it appears. Just before that, though, let's redisplay the baseline. Let's go to Project. Let's go to Format, where it says Baseline. Let's drop that down and show the baseline. And here we can see how things have changed simply as a result of updating status. When we first planned this task, we were planning that it would start on that Tuesday there and finish at the end of the following Monday. But since then, we've been told by the person doing the work that they started later, and they did that because they could actually get this task done quicker than we allocated for it. So now we can see that we could make up a little bit of time in the rest of our schedule there. If this had successors, those would all have been pulled in a little bit, allowed to start earlier as a result of the fact that this task here finished early. Okay, let's open up a somewhat more complicated schedule and prepare it for tracking. So let's do this. Let's go to File and New. And I'm going to use the software development template to produce my schedule. Now, if the template's not appearing here, you can search online for templates and you can say software development plan, and it will become available to you. What I'm going to do is select over here, software development template, and let's just create a schedule based on that. Now, a couple of things just to get a screen that's helpful to us. The first thing I'm going to do is go to the View tab and uncheck Details, which will actually show this report here, but I'm going to go away from that just by clicking at the top left Gantt chart. So I've just got my Gantt chart showing. This Gantt chart is currently collapsed to outline level 2. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space over on the right for the graphical area by clicking the divider and holding and pulling it to the left a little bit. On the View tab, I'm going to say I want the outline level to be all the subtasks. So those are all of my subtasks are showing now. In other words, I fully expanded all of those summaries. In addition to that, what I'm going to do is change the time scale of the display slightly. On the View tab, where it says timescale days, I'm just going to drop down and go to weeks. So now I've got a little bit more of I've sort of zoomed out a little bit there so I can see more of the time frame. Well, right now, this schedule defaulted to start today. Today for me is right here. So we're starting the first working day after today, in fact, is when it's starting. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the Project tab and click Project Information. And what I'd like to do is to set the start date of this project to the 1st of December 2021. And you can do that. Doesn't matter what the date is for you in the real world now, you can do that. So set it to the 1st of December 2021. Let's set the current date, and you can actually leave it. Well, you're not going to leave it because it's not the same date for you, but set the current date to February 6th of 2022. And for the status date, I'd like you to set a status date of the end of last year as it appears here, which was the end of December. Okay, a couple of other things we're going to do. We're going to, all these resources that are assigned to various tasks here, let's check to see if they have costs associated with them. Let's go to resource up here. And let's go to the resource sheet. So to do that, let's actually go to view and choose resource sheet. And apparently this project doesn't cost us anything because all the resources are free. So I'm just going to make all of the resources cost $50 an hour. That doesn't mean to say that's what their salary is. That's just what it costs my organization to use them. Now you could just type 50 all the way down, or you could select the first 50, get the little fill handle and drag it down. All of those resources now cost me $50 an hour. And now let's go back via the View tab. Let's go back to the Gantt chart. And just so you can see the effect of what I just did, let's right-click on the predecessors column and insert the column Cost. And you can see now everything costs money apart from the milestones here, but any task that has resources assigned for a duration, project calculates the cost based on the cost of the resource. Here's an example. It's a 1-day, 8-hour task. We assigned one resource. They all cost $50 an hour. And therefore, this one is $400. That's the cost of that task. They all roll up, all the costs, into the summary tasks. And all of the summary tasks roll up to the overall project cost here. But what we're doing is we're looking to track progress. So let's decide to display the status bar again, mainly so that you can see what's going on. So let's go to the Format tab up here. Let's go to Grid Lines and Grid Lines again, where it says Line to Change. Again, we did this just a moment ago, but let's go to Status Date. Let's choose this dash dot, and let's go to red and click OK. So there's that status date. And let's do something straightforward here. Let's actually tell project that we did indeed status this for the end of January. We did that last month. So, excuse me, for the end of January, we statused. So we statused a little while ago as of the end of January. And let's tell project everything is exactly what it needs to be. So to show you something that applies more in a scenario with a complicated project, let's click on Project. Let's go to Update Project, and let's super lazily say everything was complete through to the end of December. So through to the end of December, which was the status date I set here. Sorry, I think earlier I just mentioned it was the end of January. Through to the end of December of last year, let's say that everything was on track. And we can just say update work as complete through the status date is what it defaults to. Let's click OK. And you'll see that everything is up to date through to the status date, through to there. So December was a good month. Everything went fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start statusing for the end of January. Remember, the current date is early February of 2022. Let's status again and do so properly for the end of February. So let's take a look at that. Let's set the status date. On the Project tab, by the way, a couple of ways you can set the status date. You can double-click Project Information and set it here. But you can also, and you might have spotted this if I just cancel out of there, on the project tab, it tells you the status date here that we'd set previously. I can just click on that and say, now let's status for the end of January. We're into early February. Let's status for the end of January. So let's set January 31st as the status date. And indeed, you see the status date moves over. So there are a number of tasks down through here that we need to take a look at to decide how we're going to reflect our progress on all of those. And while I think about it, now that the status is okay, I think, you know what? I better set a baseline before we start changing things. I've got away with not setting a baseline so far because everything happened as planned. But before I start updating, let's set that baseline. So let's go to set baseline again, and let's just set OK. And by baselining, we just take a snapshot of all the start dates, all the finish dates, and the costs down here. So let's start updating the situation for the analyst here, this task 20. That task should have started and should have finished by now. So if I speak with the analyst and say, how did he get on with that task? And the person says, everything's fine. I finished, I started and finished as expected. I could go back to my task tab here and I could say, okay, mark on track. And there it is, it's complete. Then I review this one and I get with the management person who was working on that task. And they say, yep, I did get it finished, but it did take longer than expected. It took me 4 days. Okay, let's update that, 4 days. But they did tell you that they're done. So that's fine. We'll mark that as complete. On the task tab, we'll mark on track. What about that second task, you say? Let's see, no problem with that one. I did start and finish immediately afterwards. I just spent an extra day after that task finished. That one was late, so this one was a little bit late as well, but at least I got it done in the allocated time. All right, you say, let's mark that one on track. Now let's take a look at this task here. This is a task that has 2 resources assigned to it. And it is possible that one of them spent longer on that task than the other one did. It's a possibility. I just assigned them to do 4 hours of work each on that task. But it's a possibility that one resource took less time than expected, and the other one needed more work than expected to get that finished. So let's take a look at that one in more detail. And speaking of details, let's click on View and click Details. In the top area, let's scroll down a little bit to get that task visible for us. That 4-hour task. Let's select it, in fact. And down at the bottom here, let's right-click and choose the Work tab. All right, in this big gray area, right-click and choose Work. And I've got this task selected. And let's take a look at what this is showing us down here. It's showing us that both resources were assigned a full 4 hours on that task. It's a 4-hour task. 2 resources were assigned 4 hours each. Now, let's see what happens if I start telling Project that things are a little bit more granular here. I could say, for example, 4 hours of work was assigned to the management person, and the management person tells me, okay, I actually spent 6 hours on that task, but I don't have any work left on that task. So I've made that adjustment. Let's just click OK there. So, of course, it is a 6-hour task based on what that person said. At the very least, it's 6 hours because that's what that person pushed it out to be. Now, this person could have spent more or less time. Either way, the amount of duration that's left on that task could be more if they spent more time on it than expected, or it could be less if they spent less time. But let's say that that person just did what they were supposed to do. They spent 4 hours on it, and there are no hours left. Now, when I click OK, it stays as a 6-hour duration task, because that's what the management person did. They spent 6 hours working on it. Notice, by the way, as soon as I said that for the last person that there is nothing left, project immediately said, okay, then that task is 100% complete. And we can show that a couple of ways. Firstly, the little bar, progress bar, fills it up on the screen. Also, there's a little check mark has appeared in the indicators column to say that it was completed. Not only that, if I were to right-click on task mode and insert the column percent complete, the first one on the list, then again, it made it 100% complete. And in fact, everybody's telling us that as a result of that, the design phase is complete. So on my task tab at the top, I can show that that task is 100% complete. Let's pull this divider down a little bit. And let's get into where things start to get somewhat interesting. So I've got 3 development tasks, and I check with the developer, and they're all to do with basically getting ready to start developing. And the person says, did all of those. So you can just scroll down here, select 3 tasks, and you can say, mark them on track. So let's do that here, mark on track. And then we could ask them, well, what about these 2? How are you getting on with developing the code and also testing? Well, there's a possibility the person could say, as far as developing code goes, I'm on track. So we could say on track. Now, I would probably be asking at this point, do you think you're still going to get done in 15 days? And the person could, of course, say, well, actually, I think I need 20 days to get that done. Having done that, it shows that there's more time needed for development. Not only that, you might have noticed it pulled forward the start of developer testing there a little bit. Keep your eye on that while I undo that. And you'll see that by making that less duration, that was allowed to start earlier. And that's because what we're looking at here is a finish to start dependency with an overlap. In fact, if the developer were to say, actually, I need 25 days to get that work done, it's going to mean basically they are not even planning to start developer testing until right at the end of the month. If we made that 30 days, which is a possibility, sometimes development does take longer, then essentially they're telling you that they haven't even planned to get rolling on their testing yet. But you might want to tinker with those dependencies because they might say, well, actually, I did start on this, so the amount of overlap needs to be a little bit more. Let's really get into fine detail here. Let's double-click task 30. And let's go to predecessors. And let's say that the lag is actually minus 90%. You have to type in all of these things to make that happen. Click OK. Now, of course, that means that they should have started developing, doing the developer testing. Let's double check with the person if that's the case, and they say yes. So you could mark it on track, but then something else catches your eye. Well, it doesn't make sense that I'm going to finish testing before I finish all the development, so I need more time on that as well. I'll make that 30 days. And the last step I'm going to do is mark this one on track. That's task 30, the developer testing task. I'm going to mark that on track. Here we go. I'm going to go to mark on track down here. Actually, let's check it and mark on track. And then let's look at a couple of other things down here. Let's look at these tester tasks here, developing unit test plans and developing integration test plans. Maybe these guys tell you, I haven't started on that. I have not started on those tasks. Well, if they haven't started on them, it doesn't make sense to be showing them back here. So what I'm actually going to do is to push them forward to show that they're actually going to start in the future, because if they haven't happened, they haven't happened. So there are a couple of ways I could do that. I could manually intervene and change the dates, or I could come back to my project tab up here and say, update project, And I'm going to say reschedule incomplete work to start after, and it will default to the status date. When I click OK, keep an eye on those two tester tasks there. And project pushes them forward because, after all, they are not complete. So slowly what we've been doing is getting more and more detailed in reflecting some of the things that people will actually tell you. It's unlikely that someone will just say 50% complete. But if they do, even then, dig in a little bit. Say, okay, did you start when you were expected to start, as you were scheduled to, and are you still planning to finish, do you think, at the original finish date? And if either of those is not a straight yes answer, then update the schedule accordingly. Now let's just take a look at that baseline that we set. So on the Format tab, let's drop down Baseline and just click the baseline. And you can see that there are quite a few changes against the baseline here. Everything was going pretty well through to about halfway through the design phase. And then a couple of things started to slip against the baseline. They still happened. And when we got into development, we've started increasing durations against the baseline, as well as having started a little bit later. Those late starts were a result of the earlier slips up here. And the other thing we've done is we just did not do any of the development of our test plans at all. But not a problem there, just eyeballing those, it looks like we've got plenty of slack before we run into any issues. You might notice that this task is not showing a successor. That's a bit of an inadequacy of the template that we've just opened. I would go and link that to the actual doing the integration testing. This one here will actually, if you hover over it, it tells you that it's linked through to review the modular code. Let me do that again. So that dependency goes to review the modular code. Let me just double click that. Goes to review modular code. So I want to find a successor for this task at a similar place in reviewing the integration code. It's a weakness that it doesn't have a dependency there. So we saw how we can update tasks with no resources assigned, how we can update the tasks that do have a resource assigned. And also we looked at a situation where we update a task that had more than one resource assigned, and they had both done slightly different amounts of work. Now, if one of these tasks were in progress currently, we might be updating separate remaining work as well. One other thing that I just wanted to show you before we start looking at some reports here is I've been looking forward on this and seeing how, as a result of updates, we're actually changing the path forward because there are consequential slips down there. But what you might also want to do is to look at these coding estimates. You originally estimated that coding and that testing would take these durations here. If I were you, I would be doing two things. One, looking down through any similar tasks in the future to see if some of my other estimates need to be updated before we even get to them. And the other thing I would be looking to see if there's any way I can claw back some of the slip that I've got against my baselines here. Maybe I can go down and reduce some of these durations and save some of the bad news that otherwise I'm going to have to report. And we'll look at some reports in just a moment. We're going to go to this report tab and look at a couple of these reports that are nifty that exist now. Before we do that, though, let me remove this split. I can go to the View tab and uncheck Details here. Another way that sometimes people will update tasks is they'll go to the View tab up here, and they'll go to Other Views, drop down, and go to the resource usage. They'll go to More Views, call up Resource Usage here. Or sometimes they'll update using the task usage. I'm going to cancel because the resource usage is actually available just right here anyway. And the way this works is you could select a task, any task down here. Actually, to be literally correct, this is an assignment. And we're going to scroll over to that. I'm going to go to the task tab here and scroll to the task so that you can see what's going on here. Here's a situation where there's the project manager has various assignments on tasks here. So the project manager has various assignments. These are tasks in the schedule, and this is where the project manager is assigned to those. And this display is almost a timesheet view, or you could visualize these as like Gantt bars, if you like. So there's a little Gantt bar of 2 days where the project manager is assigned 4 days for each of those days, Thursday and Friday. Well, it's possible that someone could come in and give you information and you want to update at a very granular level. You might want to update actual work down here. So if I right click on there and add in actual work, a lot of these show actual work because the time frame is back in December. But let's scroll forward a little bit to towards the end of January and look at some of the tasks that we didn't update just a moment ago and scroll down to where there's some work assigned. Might well be that we have a task like this one, for example, where we want to say that some actual work happened on this task. Imagine this going forward a little bit. Let's say that we had our status date set further, but this will work as well. Let's say our status date is, let's set the status date for the beginning of the week of February 6th. Let's take a look here. And we could come in and say, okay, so for this task here, the project manager actually spent 4 hours that day working on it. Watch what happens when I do that. If I hit in 4, project says, okay, well, we need an extra day to do the remaining 4 hours then. Either that or we assign overtime. Project manager says, I did 10 hours of work that day. That is only 2 hours off into the future after these 2 planned days. So maybe the person does 10 hours there and 8 hours there. So that task will now show as complete in the schedule because all the work is done and there's nothing pushing out into the future here. So if you really want to get down to an infinitely deep level of tracking, you can do. If you've got a task that has more than one resource assigned, then rather, going back to the view, rather than the resource usage view, you probably want to use the task usage view. Let's go down and look at that briefly. Task usage and apply it. This is similar to what we were looking at, but instead of having resources and all their assignments, it's like the flip side. We show tasks and the assigned resources below it. For example, this one right here, that's a task. Let's scroll over to it. Let's click on task. And I'm going to scroll to the task. And you can see that here's another situation where a project manager and an analyst were assigned 4 hours each. Let's right click and show actual work. And you can now see what actually happened on that task. That's a task which is in the past. We marked it all on track. So project said, okay, so that was a 4-hour task scheduled for Monday, the 20th of December. And you told me that it happened as planned. Therefore, both of those resources actually did 4 hours of work on that task. If you need to get down to this level of detail, that's fine. At the very least, and let's go back to our Gantt chart, when you are statusing a schedule, show the actual start dates, if there's any remaining duration beyond what was originally planned, and then when you finish making your updates for a particular task, just click on it there and say on the task tab, mark on track. All of that is better than simply just putting in a % complete, but just putting in a % complete is better than not statusing at all. The main message of any statusing, however detailed or high level you do your statusing, there are implications in the real world of what is actually happening compared to plan. So Make sure that you address those issues beyond your schedule, have the conversations with stakeholders as necessary, and update the path going forward. Now, just before we leave all of this, I did say we'd look at some reports. Click on the Report tab up here, and there's some pretty cool reports these days in Microsoft Project in various categories. For example, if I drop down Costs, I can click on an Earned Value report. And here's a report which is showing me my new estimate at completion for the project based on progress to date. And you'll see that the work that I've actually done, the budgeted cost of work performed here, another term for this is earned value. That's what I've accomplished, but it cost me more. And the reason it cost more is I pushed out some of the durations of the tasks. Well, if you don't know what earned value is all about, that report is not as helpful as it might be for people that do. So let's look at a couple of others. Let's look at in progress. The category of reports are called in progress. Let's look at late tasks. And here we can see that here are tasks that are late compared to the status date. Well, I just marked everything on track, so we don't have anything showing as late, but we do have a little pie chart that shows the percentage or proportion of tasks, if you like, that are complete, those that are on schedule, they're in progress, but they're on schedule against the baseline, or they have not slipped against the baseline. And here's a task which in the future that we haven't started on. Just so that we can get something meaningful on here, let's quickly go back to the Gantt chart here. And let's set the status date a little bit later. Right now, we're sort of statused through to the status date. And let's set the status date a month later. So let's go to the project tab here. Let's set the status date to the end of February. So we'll go to February and 28th. We'll click OK. Status date jumps over here. And now, of course, there are tasks that should be further along than they are showing here. That task should have finished as of the status date until we go in and replan, of course. But let's look back at that report we were looking at a moment ago. Click on Report, In Progress. Now let's look at late tasks. And now we've got tasks showing here as late. And if the term late is not obvious, then in all of these reports, any definitions such as late or whatever, it tells you at the top. Tasks that are late as compared to the status date. A task is late if its finish date has passed or it is not progressing as planned. And there are several tasks like that now because I've moved the status date on out. And there are some other good reports you could look at. What I would encourage you to do is just explore some of these. Now, most of them won't show anything if there is nothing to show. Just like a moment ago, if you don't have any late tasks, there's nothing going to appear there. But if you do have late tasks, then you'll get them listed for you. But we could look, for example, at a cost category of reports. We could look at not the earned value we looked at before, but let's just look at a task cost overview. And here we've got various tasks which are in various statuses over here. But if we look down at the left, we'll see a table. Each of these, by the way, is one of the major summary tasks in that schedule we looked at. For example, we were looking at design earlier on. Well, there's still some design work to do as of the status date. The baseline cost for that was $6,000, but currently it looks like it's going to cost us $6,900 to get that done. On the report tab, let's just look at in progress again and look at slipping tasks. Slipping tasks are those that have pushed away from the baseline dates, which really is everything from this point forward pretty much in the schedule you'll probably remember. So explore those various reports. They can show you a lot regarding the status of tasks, whether or not they've been statused, whether they need to be statused, whether they're late, whether they're slipping. And then you've got the whole category of reports, which is to do with comparing costs against baseline costs and so on. So just explore these. Each of these is a category, and within each of them, there are other reports under there. Okay, let's think about what it was that we covered in this lesson. So let's just go back to the slideshow a moment. We, at both a high level and at a very detailed level, we looked at updating status on tasks, look at how we can update the path forward to reflect that status, and the need to compare what's going on in our schedule with the baseline that we set. We also saw that the various reports that we can cut out of the schedule once there is data to be tracked. If you're going to experiment with some of this, make sure that you have a schedule which has resources assigned. Those resources have costs, that a baseline is set. Change a couple of things to durations after you set the baseline. Set a status date, and then start setting progress for some tasks what it should be and some for what it was not expected against that status date. That way, you can try the various permutations of what we did. And when you do look at the reports, you'll see meaningful information on them. Okay, so thank you for watching this lesson. There's a lot going on with statusing. Hopefully, if nothing else, you've seen that you can be as simple as you want in statusing, or you can go down to a very great amount of detail. If you like the lesson, please indicate that in YouTube. Do so for any other lessons that you like as well. Let people know that the course is out there. And I certainly appreciate you watching. I will definitely appreciate it if you buy me a coffee. I definitely need a coffee after that lesson. You probably do as well. There are other lessons in the course. This is lesson 6. From this point forward, if you look up here, we've looked at having tasks and resources and basically laying out a schedule. And now we've been looking at updating the schedule as progress unfolds. What we're going to move into in the remaining lessons here is more to do with customizing the look, feel, and behavior of projects in these 2 lessons. Then we're going to be looking at working in a multi-project environment where projects might be part of master projects and some of our resources support more than one project. And finally, we'll look at some more detailed tinkering with functionality through add-ins and macros. So that's it for this lesson. Thank you very much for taking part, and hopefully it's of value to you. I'll see you back here for some of the other lessons that are in store for you. Thanks again.